this is a very interesting topic, how to drive better business outcomes with ideation and enterprise architecture. And it's something we've been looking at Corso for quite a while now, for the past 4 years. Now, traditional innovation management best practices have often stopped at the implementation phase. So quite often you'll develop ideas, you prioritize your organization's best ideas, then what do you do? So you've then got enterprise architecture, which is effectively where business and IT infrastructure is captured, analyzed, and quite often EAs have struggled to communicate the value of EA and to prioritize the initiatives within EA. So what we've been looking at is an integrated approach that marries both the enterprise architecture team's knowledge with an entire process for managing ideas and innovation. We actually call this strategic planning. So it really takes you from assessment and impact and even financials to some extent of ideas all the way through to delivery. And we call that ideas to delivery. And it's really about ensuring and making sure that your ideas are being captured in the organization, they're being stored, analyzed, communicated. Your team is making decisions based upon those ideas and prioritize them together in a structured manner. And furthermore, it goes further forward into the enterprise architecture so that you can actually look at the impact of change of that idea across the organization using enterprise architecture. So what are the drivers? What are the different types of innovation that are out there? And how does an agile enterprise architecture approach affect that? And how does it align with what the business is trying to achieve? So from a Corso point of view, who are we? So we've been around for about 4.5 years. We've got extensive enterprise architecture and strategic planning experience. So we work with many customers on a consultative basis. We used to work at IBM, a company called Logic, and another company called Popkin Software, which was in the enterprise architecture space. We're we're actually members of various standards bodies. We've got very tight relationships with analysts, and we're working on those standards. We are a SaaS product company, so we have a product which is software as a service, and it supplies both innovation management and enterprise architecture capabilities. And we've got a global footprint, so we're based out of the UK, with offices in the US, Australia, and Canada. And as I mentioned, we've got a very strong professional services arm. So how does Gartner see business outcome-driven enterprise architecture and alignment? So a based approach to enterprise architecture, it helps align the business needs with the IT department as a whole. So what the business needs, you're able to prime the IT and the technology services part of the organization, as well as looking at things like application portfolios in order to achieve what you've set out to do. And you can progress that from both a departmental point of view or an organization or enterprise as a whole. So what you're seeing here is one of Gartner's slides that depicts that. So the business needs are driven from the strategy, the goals, the business capabilities, and then what the organization must do to support it. So here you can see very clearly you've now got an enterprise architecture focus to business needs driven outcomes. And quite often there's a discussion going on in enterprises and standards bodies about whether business capabilities and business strategies and goals fit within enterprise architecture or outside of enterprise architecture. And from a tooling perspective, we actually don't mind. It actually crosses the boundary between enterprise architecture and innovation management when we talk about strategic planning. And here's another slide from Gartner, which is interesting. So on the left-hand side here, we're talking about ideation from a disruption point of view. So exploring new ideas, be able to deal with those as they come into the organization, be able to have recommendations that affect your delivery schedule as an organization. And what you need to do is to actually rationalize those ideas that are coming in, looking to evaluate those opportunities and risks, looking to create transformational roadmaps of change, so what's going to happen, and start rationalizing and actually putting some type of benefit on those business outcomes. And this gets quite interesting, because what you're seeing here, if you've got lots of disruption and lots of ideation coming into the organization, if you don't manage that process, it's very hard to rationalize and understand the impact, of those opportunities on your organization, and then effectively affect the delivery and ensure you're adding value to what you do. So to aid in doing that, there are various deliverables that help you to deliver business value in the organization. So the first thing we've got here are measurable deliverables. So these are deliverables that measure the enterprise architecture's direct impact on a business. You've then got actionable deliverables. So these are deliverables that drive change in relation to business outcomes. We then talk about diagnostic deliverables. So these are analytic tools which are purposed for determining the knock-on effects of business decisions on the organization. And then we've got enabling deliverables. So this is the collected information that enable diagnostic deliverables. So essentially, this is the basis on which the analysis in diagnostic deliverables is formed. And quite often, you'll see your architecture supporting a lot of these. And the operational deliverables we've got here are focused internally on enterprise architecture teams themselves. And these help define where an enterprise architecture team is now and an outline of what they need to do to move forward. So, we need to focus on those deliverables in order to drive enterprise architecture forward. Now, there are a couple of terms that we've talked about in previous presentations. I'm just going to give you a recap on, because these are useful as we move forward when we talk about ideation, innovation, and EA within a strategic planning lifecycle. So the first term here is Vanguard Enterprise Architect. So this is Gartner's term for what we're calling the architect of tomorrow. So these are very much understanding new technology, new trends, new thinking, whilst effectively managing the current estate within the organization. So these are very much forward-thinking people, and that's not to say that a traditional enterprise architect doesn't have value, and we should all pack up and go home. And in many organizations, the role of a Vanguard enterprise architect and a traditional enterprise architect is performed by the same person. So within this role, we're really looking at new things like the Internet of Things, mobile, cloud, SaaS, things like data privacy, cybersecurity. We're understanding things like intelligence, business intelligence, looking at analytics, making use of information. The Vanguard Enterprise Architect is also responsible for looking at breakthrough opportunities. So they're also looking at specialist thinking into enterprise architecture. So things like digitization. Where does the organization need to be tomorrow to be able to compete effectively? And what we're finding now is that because of this role of the Vanguard Enterprise Architect, then those breakthrough opportunities are very tightly aligned with innovation management and ideation. So it's now not only the research and development team that are responsible for innovation, it's now becoming more the remit of the Vanguard Enterprise Architect. And certainly we're seeing from our customers that we're speaking to more and more customers who have innovation and enterprise architecture going hand in hand together. Okay, then we talk about bimodal IT, which is another phrase we referred to previously. Okay, so this is a term closely aligned with the Vanguard Enterprise Architect. It's focused on business outcomes. And bimodal IT is really looking at keeping the lights going on the existing organization, so making sure those key systems are still performing, and at the same time looking at how we handle innovation. And those are called, often we call those mode 1 and mode 2. And mode 1 is really about doing more with what we've got. So making savings, efficiencies, making sure that things are, the core systems are going, that are powering the business, but also looking at those mode 2 things, which are around innovation and disruption. So both modes share the same organizational goals and objectives, i.e. if our goal or objective is to increase revenue by 25%, we're supporting those both with mode 1 and mode 2 operations. Bimodal IT makes a differentiation because it now starts to encompass innovation, and starts to understand what is being built by the business teams. So we're looking at new revenue opportunities. We may be doing some R&D to see what the impact of a new technology changes. Looking at disruptive factors, and as I mentioned before, new technologies and things such as the Internet of Things. And Bimodal IT is about organisations supporting both traditional and cutting-edge modes of delivery at the same time. Okay, so we're not saying, just to re-emphasise that, we're not saying that Bimodal IT is about switching off the traditional role of the organisation, just looking at what can be done. With the future, it's about keeping the lights on, keeping the business going, but while embracing innovation. So let's have a quick look at how we see ideation and innovation managed in most organisations and what people are trying to achieve. So quite often in the past, people have had things like suggestion boxes, and some people are using things like innovation management software. So quite often suggestion boxes aren't aligned to the goals of the business. Ideas aren't evaluated in a timely manner. Lots of people have used things like Kanban boards or post-it notes to start gathering ideas as a next move on from a suggestion box. Obviously, things like suggestion boxes are bound by location, so they're based in one place. And obviously, there's no feedback loop in there as well. So people that enter ideas really don't get feedback from those suggestion boxes. The next move on from this has been innovation management software. So you can look out there in the marketplace at the moment, and there's a whole range of innovation management tools out there. There are literally hundreds of those. A lot of those tools actually stop at innovation management. And that's something we're moving forward with our organisation, is linking innovation management to enterprise architecture. And again, you'll see later in the presentation how we do that. And that's not to say innovation management software is bad or shouldn't be used, but it certainly often stops at a prioritised set of ideas that are sometimes linked to the goals of the business, quite often aren't. So let's take a little look at some of what we call the primary forces that shape innovation. So there are actually, in some research by Vijay Kumar, there are 4 primary forces that shape the way that we think about innovation. So the primary forces he's identified that shape successful innovations are business on the left here, technology at the top, design at the bottom, and society on the right. And the force of business relates to the question of what is viable in the market. So where are the market gaps, and how do we fill those? Okay, so really looking from a business perspective at innovation. The technology looks at what's possible with new emerging technologies and how to create new offerings. So what's the art of the possible? The design force at the bottom asks what's desirable for people and how to create humanized solutions. So really, when we talk about innovation, we have to start engaging people and think about people and the design. And the society is focused on what's sustainable for the community and the environment. And when you integrate these forces, you can produce innovations that deliver higher user and economic value. So we can treat these as measures we can take forward in actually driving innovation into the organisation. And if we take a look at some research from the Dublin consulting firm, they've identified 10 types of innovation, and this is a product of 10 years of work. And if you start to understand that these 10 types of innovation, these are useful to assist in identifying opportunities and how to construct new innovation. And we're not going to cover these in detail, a lot of detail in this presentation just because of time, and you can go and research these. But they're actually based upon 3 categories going across the top here. So the types of innovation assigned to configuration, these are focused on inner workings and business systems. So they're looking at the profit, network, structure, and process. And quite quickly, you can start to see here where these types of innovation influences and these types of innovations start to overlap with things like enterprise architecture, where we talk about process, structure, networks. Offering is focused on core products and services. And again, when we start to look at things like enterprise architecture, we certainly talk about products and systems, and we certainly talk about metrics and performance of systems. And on the end here, we talk about experience. So we're focusing on the customer-facing elements of the business and its systems. So again, these are areas where we do touch upon in enterprise architecture, things like services. Much more on the strategy side, we start talking about channel, routes to market, how we engage customers. Okay, so if you can combine more than one or two types of these, you get a greater impact of your innovation. You start to understand it a lot more, and you can start to drive down into your architecture, and you can start to see how the architecture could influence our thinking and help us to understand the areas of innovation to focus on. So typically our EA initiatives will have documented most of this information about our organization. So it makes change easier, and it makes it easier for us to identify and assess the impact of change for any type of innovation. So according to Tim Brown, who was the CEO and president of IDEO, so the goal of design thinking is matching people's needs with what is technologically feasible and viable as a business strategy. And it's interesting because design thinking is a formal method for practical resolution of problems or issues with the intent of an improved future result. So by integrating enterprise architecture with innovation management, we're following a well-worn path typified by design thinking. And it's something, design thinking is something, if you're interested in that, you should certainly go and research some of Tim Brown's work. So let's now take a look at our innovation process. And if you're in innovation management already, you may have your own process. You may not have a process at all. It's certainly something we recommend. And this is one we've used a lot with our clients. So coming across the top here, we've got the area of innovation. And when we talk about the area of innovation, this is really about our strategy. So what are the things we should focus on? What are the goals? What are the objectives? From an enterprise architecture point of view, this is clearly looking at things like the motivation model, looking at what are the drivers. What do we want to achieve during the next 12 months, 24 months, 36 months? Certainly the type of messaging that we talk to when we talk to executives in the organization. From there, we can start to look at things like innovation challenges. So what are the challenges for us as an organization? What are the challenges in our broader ecosystem? What are the sort of government challenges, society challenges that we need to be aware of? So we can start to look at creating either what we call challenges or campaigns. And those campaigns can be used as collectors to go and collect ideas that can eventually feed requirements, and that can feed through into our enterprise architecture. And then we have to look at what are our scoring mechanisms, and we've covered some of those in the first few slides. So we've identified things that can help us identify like the four primary forces for shaping innovation. Those can help us provide metrics, or the 10 types of innovation. There's 10 types of influence we can have on criteria for measuring whether ideas are good or not. And then we can define scorecards here. And scorecards let us put scores on our ideas. And then we move into the next phase here. And this is where we've got a funnel. So the funnel with all the circles in here are all of our innovations or ideas. And what we're doing in this phase here is discovering and harvesting. So we launch a campaign. So we launch a campaign around a challenge. It's tied to a goal. We then start to capture those ideas and metrics around those. And then we can socialize things. We can promote discussions around those ideas. And the next phase then is, once we've got a whole set of ideas coming in, we can then start to review and rate the ideas. We can rank them according to our criteria and scorecards. We can have experts within the organization start to rank those ideas, provide a crowd rating and a very deep and broad evaluation. And then we can shortlist and propose our ideas based upon that criteria, create business cases, determine our next steps. If we want to, we can create proof of concepts. So we can create technology that we can either throw away or keep. Sometimes we can use innovation not just to manage technology change, but also things just like affecting business processes, changing the way a process works. Gather feedback on the pilot process or the pilot change, review the outcomes and implement, and then define a portfolio of projects or work packages for implementation. assign timescales to them, and implement them. And obviously, along the route here, as we're starting to triage and prioritize and shortlist and propose, we can also start looking at our enterprise architecture and looking very quickly to use our enterprise architecture to determine what's in and what's out of scope. So let's have a little look at that in more detail. And again, if you've been on previous presentations, you may have seen us use this slide quite a few times. So we need to look more closely at what we call the strategic planning lifecycle. And as we mentioned before, traditionally, the innovation management best practice has stopped at the end of that funnel at the implementation phase. So you prioritize your organization's best ideas, you've captured them. Now what do you do? So we've got enterprise architecture here, and what we're doing here is providing an integrated approach. So from your ideas and your initiatives here, this is a prioritized list of ideas and initiatives. You can decide on what are the projects you should do. You can also make sure that your ideas and initiatives are aligned to your strategy, goals, objectives, etc. That vision, and as I mentioned before, there is debate about whether the motivation model sits within the enterprise architecture function or not. But certainly if you're using frameworks like TOGAF or Archimate, then that vision, strategy, goals and objectives fits within the model for those frameworks. So you have an underlying model here, which is basically the orange box around here that we're looking at, that shows us the goals and objectives linked to the ideas, but also driving the enterprise architecture, and the enterprise architecture helping us drive some of the strategy and goals. And to ensure that we're doing the right things within enterprise architecture, we go through project prioritization and planning. So we're making sure that everything that we do when we prioritize our projects is within the aims or strategy and goals and objectives. When we've got a prioritization of projects, then we can look at the things we will do and start to implement those work packages, programs, and projects. And that's what we call do things right. So we're using enterprise architecture here as a governance mechanism to ensure that we're using the right technologies, we're following the right business processes, we're using the right application estate, and we're making sure that we can deliver strategically what needs to be done. And obviously there's a feedback loop there. We can start to feed back those strategic delivery outputs back to our ideas and initiatives. So this is really how we're linking together innovation management and enterprise architecture. So effectively, if you think about a sausage machine, we've got the innovation management sausage machine turning all the time, ideas coming in, and that's very well oiled. Those ideas are coming in. We've got a prioritized list of ideas and initiatives. We can match those to things we should be doing in terms of enterprise architecture. We're making sure they're driven by goals, and the whole enterprise architecture lifecycle starts to ensure that it's got value within the business. Okay, so I'm not expecting to have a look at this. This is some examples from our tool, but proposed criteria for evaluation. Things like, does an idea have high IT alignment? So is it aligned with the way we're taking IT, digitization? Does it have a market share, a new market share? What's the business impact? What's the source of the idea? So we may decide that some of our criteria for weighting, if it comes from a customer, then it's more important than if it comes from an employee. If it comes from a partner, it might have a lower value. And what's the estimated values of the ideas? What's the cost to implement? And then we start to look at things like, how many requirements does that idea spawn? So ideation sits very much before we get into things like formal requirements management. And each requirement we can link back to an idea. And then we can start to use metrics, so things like how many requirements are linked to ideas, and start to focus and provide scorings for that type of thing. And I mentioned earlier on about challenges and campaigns. Okay, so you can create a series of challenges and campaigns that directly address a business goal. So if our business goal is we want cloud, mobile, and social adoption for all of our employees in the next 12 months, we can create a campaign around that where we start to gather ideas that help us to enable that goal. And campaigns can be closed, so we could force people to actually contribute by making it open only for 3 months, for example, and provide prizes and recognition and rewards. Or we can take a campaign and we can just leave it open-ended. So it's an ongoing campaign, it's an ongoing business goal or driver. So literally you're using these campaigns to force and collect things into the funnel and start populating the funnel. Very much like a sales process or a sales and marketing process where you're driving leads into a marketing funnel, and then the sales engine is actually enabling and working on those leads to close deals. Exactly the same with enterprise architecture and innovation management. Okay, more detail on campaigns. Yeah, so the goal of a campaign is often to solve a certain problem or uncover a new opportunity, and it's often where decisions need to be made, and you can include many different stakeholders in that. Yeah, and it's often useful to use strategic goals because they're measurable, and they are extremely good examples of choices for focus for a campaign. The other thing you can do is open up campaigns to different communities of people as well. So it may be that you open up a campaign to the whole organization, but then it might be that you open up a campaign to just a certain small number of users to provide focus to the initiative. Okay, so again, just showing a little bit from here. So we're focusing here on a certain organizational need, and this is using an insurance system. So here we're focusing on ideas to improve claims handling. Yep. As I mentioned, we can make them time-bound, so they have an start date and end date to encourage participation and urgency. They're based upon a strategy or goal. And again, this is the goal from the motivation model. So on our platform, we're taking the goal from things like Archimate and TOGAF and making sure that the campaign ties to that. So every time you start thinking about a campaign within innovation management, it's tied to the same goal and driver that you're using in your architecture. And we can pose questions to target stakeholders on a specific topic. So we can start to focus in, helping them to motivate them to actually put the right types of ideas into the funnel. And as I mentioned, we can put communities together, so we can either limit or have a wide-ranging set of stakeholders. Now, campaigns don't have to be just about ideas. So when we're talking about innovation and ideation, because we're using the word idea, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to capture ideas. So it might be that we've got a specific set of regulatory compliance we have to satisfy, and it could be that we actually start to capture all of the requirements as part of a campaign. Or it could be that we're going to evaluate some new software. So we could have a campaign where we start to collect different vendors as part of the campaign. So these are still ideas, yet they're ideas about what type of vendor we're going to have, or which vendor we're going to have to solve a particular business issue. We can then publish the campaign to launch and market the campaign. Are you then kicking off your funnel? Okay, so to give you a little bit of guidance on this, and this is typically what we've done again with our customers. So which campaign should you start with? So quite often, you can start to identify in your architecture mode 2 assets. And by mode 2, we start to look at bimodal IT, and we can see that we can start to see things like which have a technology priority or which are helping us to achieve a specific business outcome. We can start to look at matching campaigns to CXO, CIO, CEO imperatives or goals, because they're quickly going to get funding. We can then use things like a business capability map. And I mentioned right at the beginning that when we looked at the first Gartner slide, we saw at the top there that they had business capability for driving through into business-driven outcomes. Okay, so again, using things like a business capability map is a really good communication tool for talking about goals, campaigns, what to focus on, and start to use things like heat maps, little colours that we can start to identify which are the business capabilities we can very quickly get value from. We can also start to see on the right hand side here a motivation model. This one's using Archimate, But we can start to see here, what are the drivers? What assessments have we carried out in the organization? What are the goals? What are the roles? What are the stakeholders? So already by building these types of views, again, that you can communicate with executives with, can help us to start to create challenges and campaigns that can start to drive ideation into the funnel. And obviously, we were using enterprise architecture assets all along the way. We're using a model underneath to actually connect the dots. Once you start to flesh out some of this information, you can start to see that we can then have and start to look at the impact of campaigns and ideas on the enterprise architecture. So I'm not expecting you to be able to read this in detail, and we will make these slides available to people afterwards. But at the top here, you have light bulbs, and those light bulbs reflect ideas. And you'll see here that, again, we're using Archimate as the example here. But here, we're now looking at tracing. So we've got a campaign which captures the ideas. People have put the ideas into the platform and into the model. We're now connecting those ideas to things like requirements, which are the next purple items. Those requirements are linking to things like business processes, roles, applications. And then we're going down the enterprise architecture stack here. So now we're looking at business processes, business services, application components, and how those application components are supported by technology, software, systems, and devices. So quite quickly, you're now looking at the impact of those ideas on the architecture and how valuable they are very, very quickly and very, very early on in the life cycle. So a key facet of this, and we'll talk about agility in a moment, is collaboration. So by using ideation and innovation, you're engaging with a broader set of business users. You can directly collaborate with non-research and development people. So you can collaborate with domain experts. You can start to organize work using things like Kanban boards. You can start to create different stakeholders, different communities that include both enterprise architects and non-enterprise architects, and the innovation community. And you can start to look at things like task management, review, peer feedback, things like gamification, so allowing people to rank and rate ideas. And eventually what you're doing is you're empowering people in the organization to have more knowledge and to be involved in the process. And naturally, both the people will have an inclination, because they've been involved in the challenges and the campaigns, to follow those through and see what happens to them, and you can feed back because everything's connected. And you'll see here we're making strong use of things like Kanban boards to manage the workload. So you can do these on a board if you like. We have an electronic version of them. Most tools, if you go into the DevOps world, or you look at development teams, a lot of the agile development teams, a lot of the software that's out there now, has Kanban boards within it. Very few Kanban boards are in enterprise architecture or innovation management. And here's taking that funnel process, the innovation management process I explained at the beginning, where we've got things like the second stage on there is strategize, discover and harvest, then triage and prioritize, shortlist and propose, etc. You'll see here we're using a Kanban board to reflect the stages, so we can see exactly where all the ideas are, and even things like requirements, where they sit in the innovation management funnel, and where the bottlenecks are, and what we parked, what we decide to work on. So naturally, we're starting to align some of the tools we're now using in agile development with agile EA and now innovation management. Okay, so it's important that we focus on stakeholders and communities as part of innovation management. Innovation benefits from different skills. Lots of people feed off each other's input. So this collaboration is really, really important, that people can actually talk to each other and share feedback. You need to start using campaigns with stakeholders so you can focus and not just scattered across the organization. You share ideas so people can actually review ideas. It's amazing how many ideas come from other people's ideas and how many people co-create together. Okay, so again, this is a quote from Brian Burke, who's a research vice president at Gartner. So the majority of EA practitioners at the moment face the challenge of how to refocus their enterprise architecture efforts to deliver business outcomes. So, and the answer to this is that the enterprise architecture efforts need to begin with an understanding of the business outcomes they must deliver. And you need to focus on the business direction and strategy. And we've covered that because the motivation model inside Archimate and TOGAF allow us to actually define that. And you use it as a guide to determine the effectiveness in moving the organization forward towards the future. So the majority of organizations aspire to be business outcome driven, but they often spend a lot of time focusing on activities like modeling or capturing artifacts instead of concentrating their efforts on identifying and enabling the delivery of business outcomes. And you need to focus on the outcomes that are valuable to senior management and that address a specific business and IT need. And that mindset's changing. So beneficial. You can use EA very quickly to identify mode 1 and mode 2 assets. So in bimodal IT, we can start to look at what things are critical from an architectural perspective to keeping the lights on in the business. What are critical systems? And then we can start to identify which are the things we can start to look at from a mode 2 point of view to start to look at innovation. And we've seen that by looking at the innovation funnel. We can start to identify which ideas affect which requirements, which affect which business processes, and therefore which underlying pieces of technology and which applications. We can create accurate and reliable plans and roadmaps. Roadmaps will apply at different levels. So you'll have strategy roadmaps, process roadmaps, location roadmaps, data, application, technology. EA can provide those roadmaps for you. So understand the impact of change, identify the cost. You've got much more increased project success and reliability for innovation. You've got standardized business and IT assets, again, to apply to ideas. And quite quickly and quite early on, you've got increased visibility for any projects. And quite early on, you can start to get rid of your ideas that you can't possibly implement. Okay, so we talk about a Corso just enough architecture. So this is really the mantra for avoiding problems that come with analysis paralysis. So delayed decision making and missed opportunity because you're analyzing too much. So you can use campaigns to focus on what you need to focus on. You don't need to model the world, just build enough architecture to answer the question. Involve lots of different stakeholders in collaboration, and discuss planning, and make planning and innovation planning part of your enterprise lifecycle. A couple of things on roadmaps. Okay, I haven't touched on roadmaps. We have got some webinars that you can go back and look at about roadmaps. But we mentioned there are many types of roadmap available. So ideas can be mapped into a roadmap. So when are ideas expected to be implemented? What are the requirements? And what's the roadmap for those requirements? And how do they affect applications? And what's the technology stack? So all of these different types of roadmaps, and when we look at the whole of that strategic planning lifecycle, all the way from the funnel through to the technology on the layered diagram, then roadmaps are a visual output from any one of those stages. Okay, so and that's quite important to understand. So you need to have different roadmaps for different users and stakeholders. Your organization will have multiple programs, projects, initiatives, technologies, requirements, ideas, campaigns planned and in flight. So these will be a key visualization for you. And any new innovation needs to be scheduled in the context of any one of those things, the programs, the projects, initiatives that are in flight. And this is interesting. So your roadmaps will also be at different versions and different stages. And it may be for different initiatives in the organization. And it's quite important that you start to understand things like enterprise architecture and how it evolves over time. And what I'll show you at the end of this presentation is a URL to our Innovation Management and Enterprise Architecture book, which you'll find very useful for actually taking you through how to drive maps and how to drive your enterprise architecture continuum on and on and on. Okay, so in summary, enterprise architects need to have an insight into the disruptive technology whilst maintaining the core, bimodal IT. We talked about an agile, collaborative, and innovation-driven approach that is, I wouldn't say just integrated with architecture blueprints, but is driven by architecture blueprints. So you're focusing on the right things. You need to look at communities and your audience and your stakeholders, so you can collaborate and get a wider range of perspectives, different skills and experience. You need to understand the current state, the future state, what's happening, what's in flight, roadmaps. You need to be able to trace back to the strategy, the goals, the motivation model. You also need to look at mode 2 opportunities and use innovation management to look at those mode 2 opportunities and how they can be incorporated into future architectures. And that really affects things like current state and future state architectures, which you may have heard of if you've been focusing on enterprise architecture. So future state isn't just doing one current state or the current state as it is today and then one future state. It's looking at many different alternatives, and innovation management can drive those alternatives so you can make accurate decisions. And the role of the Vanguard enterprise architect is very tightly coupled with innovation management and enterprise architecture to look at those new opportunities. And the Vanguard enterprise architect should be in line and in bed with the innovation management team if they aren't already. So that's really the end of the presentation. And what I'll leave you with here is next steps. If you want to try out our platform and tool, we've got some really nice guides and help topics on taking you through how to do innovation management and enterprise architecture. It's all online. You don't have to install any software. Download the book, and the book's very popular. I think we've had over 2,500 downloads of it already. And feel free to subscribe to our EA blog or follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn.